Welcome to the New to Crypto podcast, designed to guide you through the crypto landscape with pinpoint accuracy, created for the new and intermediate crypto investor. Join your host, Crypto Travels Michael, as he takes you through the different facets of getting started and succeeding in your crypto journey. New to Crypto podcast brings you new episodes daily, Monday through Friday, with surprise bonus episodes sometimes on the weekend. Let me ask you, are you new to crypto? Don't know where to start? Are you more experienced but have questions? Then you're in the right place. This podcast is designed for you. Coming at you from the Trading Center in the Lifestyle Design Studio, here's your host, Crypto Travels Michael.
Brave Wallet is the first secure crypto wallet built natively in a Web3 crypto browser. No extension required. You can store, manage, and grow your portfolio, get NFTs and multi-chain support. Download the Brave privacy browser at brave.com/new-to-crypto and click on the wallet icon to get started.
Hey, welcome to today's podcast. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. I have actually another one of the leaders from SIMBA Chain, and today is a phenomenal interview with Ian Taylor. Ian is the CTO and co-founder at SIMBA Chain. So he's basically the technical lead, if you will. And currently, Ian is also a full research professor at the University of Notre Dame on leave at the School of Computer Science Engineering and Computational Scientist at the Computing Research Center. Also, previously, Ian was a full professor at Cardiff University in the UK. He has managed more than 15 research projects at Cardiff University. And Ian's research over the last 25 years has covered a broad range of distributed computing areas. And now he specializes in blockchain, machine learning, open data access, cloud computing, and all kinds of awesome things that we're going to cover today. And Ian has also won the Naval Research Lab, the Best Research Paper Prize, several years, 3 different years. And he's been part of a 20-year-long collaboration with the Naval Research Lab. He has over 11,000 citations. You know, for all of you PhDs and academics, his H-index is 47. Do me a favor and welcome to the show, Ian, to the podcast. Ian, man, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the welcome.
Absolutely. Hey, before we dive into some more technical questions about SIMBA and SIMBA Chain, can you share with our listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Wales in the UK, went to Cardiff University to do a degree in computer science, and then I did a PhD in physics and music and computer science. And I got kind of grabbed by the gravitational wave group in Cardiff to focus on data acquisition system for the GEO 600 gravitational wave detector. I don't know, some of you might recall some years ago they won a Nobel Prize for detecting gravitational waves, so that's pretty cool. And then after that, I became a professor in Cardiff teaching distributed systems. And then I also, around 99, I came to the US. So I was here in the US about half of my time. And worked for the Naval Research Lab, as you mentioned earlier. Worked with those for about 15, 18 years, something like that. And then in 2016, I joined University of Notre Dame. And actually, as soon as I joined there, a local company, a guy called Joel Nidegg, who's the co-founder of SIMBA, he contacted university, CRC Research Center, and asked if any of the professors were interested in doing a grant with DARPA on blockchain. So Yorick, the director of CRC, offered it to me. I said, sure, yeah, I'll take it. So I wrote this proposal. I was actually in Europe that summer, and I was in 6 different countries, and I wrote a section of the proposal in each country, so it was decentralized from the outset. While I was working, while I was kind of understanding blockchain and reading about it, and I loved the concept from the outset. My background's in distributed computing, so things like asymmetric crypto systems, hash codes, and all of the great stuff that happened in the P2P kind of era, like things like Freenet, which used all of those things widely and innovatively. Blockchain again, captured those tools and kind of used them to secure data and produce non-repeatable storage and so forth. So I was immediately interested in it. I submitted the proposal. That proposal was called SIMBA, but it stood for Secure Messaging on a Blockchain Architecture originally. Now we kept the name, which was a surprise at the beginning, but it was a name that stuck with people. So we kept the name, and now it's Simple Blockchain Applications. So that's a bit of my background on how SIMBA got started. That project, actually, what we learned during that project, that it was really hard to kind of stand up prototype applications. We wanted to build a secure messaging application using Fabric back in 2016. Things were changing. They just brought in gRPC for communications, for example. So it was changing quite a lot, and we were trying to kind of stand up this demo, and it was quite hard. And we just realized things were changing so much. Having a consistent interface, something simple that people could use to connect to not only one blockchain but several blockchains would be really valuable. And that was the premise that we started SIMBA Chain on, to make it simpler for people to use blockchain.
Fantastic. I think it's something that was desperately needed in the space. And I also, I hear what you're saying and touched on that once you guys started with the DARPA project and found out how technical and how difficult it is to build that out as an organization, and to identify that just, regular enterprises and businesses, needed a bridge, right? Someone to help them get into Web3, and SIMBA was born, and here we are. And you guys are doing some phenomenal work in many different industries through manufacturing. And we talked with Brian about, what you're doing in Mexico with the coffee and the talks and the Air Force and the medical industry and all that kind of, different use cases. And we actually talked with Brian about the intro to SIMBA Blocks platform, but I wanted to take a little deeper dive with you. And if you can sort of go a little deeper about the family of plugins for Web3 software suites and, SIMBA Chain, if you can kind of unpack the SIMBA Blocks platform a little more detailed.
Yeah. So I guess if I start from the platform itself and then kind of delve into the environments, the plugins that we support. So the platform itself, there's several tools. So the general idea is to make it very simple to interface with blockchain applications. At the kind of center of that is a REST API interface, essentially, to contracts. And the way that works is we'll take a contract, deploy it to a blockchain, and we'll harvest the metadata from that contract, and we use that to auto-generate an API on the fly. So that API doesn't exist as code. We expose it as readoc, we expose it as Swagger, and so forth. And you can hit the endpoints and talk to us as a REST API. It's a full REST API and documented, but it's completely virtual. So that's the kind of center. And you think, well, if it's that simple, there's a lot going on in blockchain. So how does all of that work? Well, we have about 12 components in the platform that took us about just over 2 years to develop to make it that simple. So if you think about kind of that middle layer, that layer on the back end, we have a resilience and syntactic checker layer, which basically checks, as the transactions come in, ensures that the transactions have the right types, so they don't get sent to the blockchain and the blockchain has to throw them back. We also manage the nonces so that we ensure the ordering of the transactions going on chain. And so forth. So there's that whole resilience layer. There's also an asynchronous mode that can go into if the blockchain can't keep up, so it kind of queues the transactions. And then at the back end of that, we support bindings to multiple chains. So we support 9 different chains right now. We support many Ethereum networks like, Avalanche. We support Binance Smart Chain. We support, of course, all of the Ethereum ones and Consensus Quorum and so forth. But we also support non-Ethereum based chains as well, which are, so in terms of non-Ethereum chains, they look a lot different. So, for example, we support Hyperledger Fabric, and that is, a very different kind of smart contract paradigm. It works in the same way. We also recently began to support Tezos, which again is a very different concept. We've also created bindings to things like Stellar, which again is orthogonal to all of those systems. It works on payment flows and so forth. So it's quite a generic kind of backend that can plug into these different systems, and they're all exposed through this REST API. So that's kind of like the backend piece, if you like. And then on the front end, we offer different search mechanisms, which are basically, we have a component we call a BlockMon, which basically every transaction that comes into SIMBA is crawled, and we build a cache of those transactions. And the cache is basically can be reconstructed at any time. And the block one application goes around and ensures all of those transactions are consistent. But what it means on the search side of things is you query that REST API, do a get on that REST API. All of the transactions written on from that endpoint can be retrieved super quick because they're cached. You can also do filters on those transactions. And we also, surrounding all of this, we provide a way of annotating smart contracts. And we provide tools for that to enable data relationships between, for example, one method and another. So you might have, an NFT minted in one, method, and then you might want to track, that minted transaction in different ways using other ones. So you can make those data connections in the contracts themselves, and we automatically create a GraphQL schema for that, which you can query. So in other words, you can design up front, you can design your data, the relationships of your data, in a way that you want to consume it. So you consume it exactly the way you want it to be consumed, preserving the relationships you want to preserve. It's kind of like it works a very similar way to the graph, but the graph, you do the schemas after the data is written, after the fact. We can actually bake those relationships in. So there's that. And then we have a smart contract designer, a graphical tool that enables you to create smart contracts with those relationships by drag and drop assets. And we call transitions. So you have assets, you wire them to transitions, multiple transitions, you name them, you double click, you put in the parameters, and it scopes out the entire application from a conceptual business kind of standpoint. And that can be just, we auto-generate Solidity, for example, for that, and you can deploy a contract. We've had students in Ohio State University modeling Bud Light supply chains with 50 components, and they're all the relationships between that complete supply chain, between the can producers and Bud Light supply and whatever, right? They're all kind of modeled out, and the contract is 1,000 lines long, and that guy never wrote code in his life. So that's the kind of power you can do from that perspective. And then surrounded it all, we have an auth layer. So SIMBA Chain is designed to work with public and private chains. For private chains, essentially you're working in an enterprise environment with existing users with existing identities. So we provide an auth layer that connects to multiple different systems. We support AD, Active Directory. We support AuthX and all of these different authentication systems. We even support CAT cards for the DoD.
Wow!
So they can connect through that. And then those external identities, when they transact through the REST API on using SIMBA Chain, we can auto-generate a wallet for them for that particular blockchain on the fly and map it consistently to that identity. So they don't even need to worry about kind of managing wallets, unless there's, obviously if there's payments involved, then we can also decentralize that and provide a decentralized mechanism too.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, we talked a little bit, Brian defined what a private chain was for our listeners. And thanks for taking a little deeper, because, this is New to Crypto podcast. So we have listeners that are really experienced in crypto and they want to know specific topics, which they're probably listening to this episode now. And then we also have folks that are newer to crypto in general. So take us down that rabbit hole about private chains and, how that I would assume that would be things like governments, U.S. military, maybe even like Boeing or a private enterprise that wants to use things for their organization purposes, right?
Yeah, I mean, private chains to me is probably too restrictive of a term. I think, what really you're talking about enterprise systems where you have consortia that want to kind of collaborate, provide a blockchain network across the consortia, so it still has consensus, which is kind of, if you had just one organization, there wouldn't be much point, but having multiple organizations that want to collaborate or want to provide data between them, that is trustless, right? So they don't need to worry about people changing data or also other people, adversaries hacking the data in the case of the DoD, right? That's a big concern.
Yeah. That would be really important.
Yeah, so it's more about kind of bringing together consortia to be able to share information, and the information that is shared, dependent on the context of that information, it needs to be secure. So there's multiple layers there. It might be that the network is is public within the consortia, right? But not accessible outside. It might be that some members of the consortium want to release information to particular entities, but have other entities not be able to see those transactions. So it does become more complicated when you're dealing with consortia, but there are tools to be able to enable that level of interaction. SIMBA provides a whole authorization layer based around role-based access to kind of provide API level authorization, and then there's other chains like Consensus Quorum that provide node-based authentication, and Fabric has channels and stuff like that. So there are various ways, but that's the kind of environment really. Enterprise companies more generally, they may want to use their own, consortia kind of scenarios, or they may want to use public chains. So there's both scenarios. But I think the private chain is more like that. It's really about consortiums.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for explaining that.
Brave Wallet is the first secure crypto wallet built natively in a Web3 crypto browser. What's Web3? Web3 is freedom from big tech and Wall Street. More control and better privacy. But there's a weak point in Web3, your crypto wallet. Most wallets are browser extensions, a Web2 technology. That means the same old risks, app spoofing, phishing scams, and theft. Brave Wallet is different. Brave Wallet is the first secure wallet built natively in a Web3 crypto browser, no extension required. With Brave Wallet, you can buy, store, send, and swap assets, manage NFTs, even connect other wallets and dApps, all from the security of the best privacy browser on the market. Whether you're new to crypto or a seasoned pro, it's time to ditch those risky extensions. It's time to switch to Brave Wallet. Download Brave at brave.com/new to crypto and click on the wallet icon to get started.
Let's talk about the Web3 plugins. And I know you have one, Truffle and Hard Hat. Can you kind of break down, which is better to implement, when, and what the best uses are and tie it into smart contracts?
Yeah, so we support Truffle, Hard Hat. So if I maybe walk through the Hard Hat example just to give a flavor of what that can do. So SIMBA has a UI, and in the UI you can do most things that you can do in the plugin. The plugin, though, provides more interactivity from familiar environments. So if you're working in Hard Hat as a Web3 developer, you can bring in your smart contracts, compile your smart contracts as you would normally in Hard Hat. And then what you can do, there's a SIMBA plugin, so you go npx Hard Hat SIMBA, and then you can do export, for example, and that will take your contracts and it will send them up to the SIMBA platform. And so the contracts now are in the SIMBA platform, and then you can go npx Hard Hat, SIMBA deploy, and it will walk you through the process. Okay, which chain do you want to deploy on? Ethereum. Which network of Ethereum? Well, Consensus Quorum, for example. And then it says, it'll say what contracts you want to deploy, and you'll select the different contracts all from the command line. And if you want to use off-chain, which is another thing we support, and how you want to sign the transaction, whether it's remote, have SIMBA do it, or whether you want to do it on the client side. And then you click go, and that'll take those contracts and deploy it on that blockchain, or to generate a REST API, and then it's there for other people to interact with. So, we have use cases where Web3 developers are focusing on that piece of it, deploying their contracts to SIMBA. And then SIMBA has this REST API, right? So any developer can code against that. So people building the core applications that are actually using this backend don't need to have that Web3 knowledge. They don't need to use Hard Hat. They could use their own interface. And there's two ways they can do that. And this is another plugin which has literally just been made available. It was developed a few months ago, but it's been made available in the past few weeks, which is, so we're creating virtual APIs on the fly for the contracts you're deploying, right? So you imagine, like, if we deploy an NFT, there's an NFT REST API. So depending on what you're deploying, you're getting that custom sort of interface to it. We've taken that one step further, and what we can do now is take that REST API, we use the Open API spec there, and we can auto-generate code for you to use on the client.
Wow.
So for example, I deployed an ERC 721 contract. I did a demo for some investors the other day, and I deployed it, and then I took this plugin, I auto-generated Python code, and then I had this local class basically in Python that I could just instantiate and I could call. So literally, from my laptop, I'm doing stuff like nft.mint, name, description, whatever, in one line of code, and I execute that script and it mints an NFT. So it's as simple as that. Wow. So now you don't even need to know REST APIs. Any beginner programmer that knows Python can call a method, right, and interact with it. So
fantastic. Wow. You guys are really making it simplified for end users,
Yeah, we imagine, Web3 developers use their own tools. A Web3 developer might want to use SIMBA to create that portable layer, right? So they develop code, deploy it on one chain, and then they can move it to the next, and the interface doesn't change. Their application doesn't change, right? So that's some of for the Web3 developers, or the people who develop Web3 applications, they're more interested in that. However, when you go into more enterprises, there is a Web3 component, right? There are smart contracts being deployed, but their teams don't know this stuff, right? They work in React, they work in Python or whatever, and they want to be able to, build front-end applications, real applications that are hooking into this infrastructure. And this enables those existing developers to literally kind of build Web3 applications using the functionality that are provided without having to invest a lot of time understanding how to use Hard Hat or Truffle or whatever and provide solidity. So it abstracts it to a level where they can just interact with it immediately.
Interesting. Let me segue into, I wanted to ask you, there's a number of different types of token contracts that can be created utilizing Platform Block. And can you mention which would be most useful for SIMBA in working and helping schools, governments, aviation, healthcare, et cetera?
Yeah, right. So the Blocks platform has the Platform Block, and then what we're working on now is to create solutions blocks, which solutions blocks. Those are customized to specific use. So what we've released so far is an NFT block, and an NFT block enables you to simply kind of interface with different NFT contracts. It also enables you to manage users. So if you have a scenario where you're building an NFT marketplace that you already have existing users for, you can kind of map those across and create NFTs for them and things. So we have that level of functionality. We're working on a supply chain block, which essentially enables you to customize tokens as they transition through different states through a supply chain. So we're working on that level of functionality now. In terms, we're building those up as customers are kind of getting into them. Some of our customers have their own, contracts that they already want to use as an interface. So there's that aspect as well. For ourselves, and we do a lot of work for the government. Those contracts we're developing sort of ourselves, and then we're using SIMBA Chain for an abstraction layer. And the government really like that abstraction layer also, because in their scenario, we're doing a project. We did a project called Vipart with the Navy, and we're just hopefully getting a new project, a StratFi project that's going to start in about, I guess, 4 or 5 months' time if we're successful. And that includes, players like Boeing and so forth. And what they're doing is they're giving us updates of aircraft production. So the DoD might order a wing for an F-18.
Okay.
Boeing we're basically tokenizing that kind of production. And then what they're doing is they're querying their internal systems, and they're providing updates about the status of that wing. Is it 10% complete? What's the estimated delivery schedule? And they're continuously providing updates, and we're doing that via 2 tiers now. So for things like that, the payload, it's providing real-time data to the DoD that they've never had access to, and connecting OEMs to the DoD like that is something that is just not
revolutionary. Congratulations! This is massive. They're helping positively impact that industry.
Yeah, no, we're very excited about the project, and it could lead to great things. So very interesting. But those projects have very custom payloads, right? They're tracking parts. These are We have to figure out the schema. We have a schema for Boeing that we've used with them in the past, but we're rolling that out with more OEMs, and we're going to have to kind of adjust that. So they're kind of more customized contracts really that we're needing to write for those. But the premise is the same. We stand it up. We have that abstraction layer for SIMBA. All of the OEMs are connecting directly into the APIs to post their data, so they never have to change their interface, even if we change blockchain on the back end.
Wow. They got to be really happy and excited and pleased with you guys.
Yeah.
Let me ask you regarding SIMBA blocks, right? And I want to talk about the library dependency. How does SIMBA blocks make it easy to deploy like a contract with the library dependency?
Yeah, so we're providing that interface, all of that interface as part of the system. So that so you don't need to worry about kind of those different dependencies on the back end. It's essentially you're dealing with SIMBA Chain API to kind of upload your contracts and deploy them, and then the development lifecycle then is really just interacting with that API to call those, make transactions on the blockchain or retrieve them. So the connectivity and the libraries that need to be in place to kind of connect to those different chains, they're part of blocks back end. And we also use different services to connect to some different chains, like, I think we use Blockdaemon to connect to Avalanche, for example, and then we used another company to connect to Polygon. So the public chains require more. You need a node essentially on that blockchain that's kind of has resilience. So we connect to services like that for that resilience layer.
Okay. And I wanted to ask you, talking about token, what standard does SIMBA implement to document how a contract can operate together?
We don't provide kind of any different documentation people would ordinarily use for that. So so that's kind of up to how a developer develops their contracts and
so it's developer specific.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Excellent. And can you share with a little bit about our listeners what the rest of 2022 into 23 and 4 look like? You have a lot of exciting things going. You guys are building more to put on top, of the platform with the blocks, and share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of different threads that we have going on. We're continuing kind of two areas. One is our blocks platform. The blocks platform is continuing to be improved and rolled out, and different features added. We have we have a team of about 25 people working on that now. Things coming up on that, where the smart contract designer is being revamped, so it can actually the way you specify those assets and transitions of those assets can actually span different contracts. So you can essentially design things like NFT scenarios where you're tracking different NFTs for different purposes. For example, we used NFTs recently to work with a group called BCSI in California to represent car titles, which is a really interesting use case, because you can basically mint the NFT with the VIN of the car, and then when somebody sells their car, they can literally just transfer their NFT from one owner to the next, and there's no kind of paperwork. It reduces fraud and all sorts, and we're talking with the DMV in California about that, moving forward with that with a pilot. So all of these, the way you can do that, we're bubbling that up into our higher level tools like our smart contract designer, so you can literally drag and drop those kind of scenarios in place. Mm-hmm. We're also we have a GraphQL interface that currently, but we're revamping that to also kind of span across different contracts. That can also span across different chains too. So if you imagine a scenario, you're running a system on one chain, and you migrate to a different chain at some point, the GraphQL query for the data can query the latest chain the data's on, and it can also query all previous chains, so you don't lose kind of references to past data. So working on that, we're making various improvements to the way we interact through the plugins. That's ongoing work. We're also having integrations with Git and things like that, so people can automate their pipelines, develop pipelines and things like that on the platform side of things. And then on the government side of things, we've just got two projects funded. One is looking at tokenizing the DoD, the way DoD funds different units across the DoD. So they various mechanisms now, like MIPA and so forth, that move money around the DoD. We're looking at how could you do that through a tokenization mechanism. So that's one project, and we have another project that is tracking space debris that has just started. It's starting next week, I believe.
Wow! So did you say debris in space?
Space
wow!
Debris, yeah.
And you're going to track it and organize the data.
Yeah, I track it using blockchain. So that's kind of exciting. These are all, pretty kind of interesting, kind of cutting edge stuff. They're all year to two length in terms of projects. And then this Stratify I mentioned earlier. This is a very large effort over 4 years in incorporating very big players. I'm not sure if I can say who those are, so I'll just say a number of OEMs and other kind of participants. That is going to be quite a large consortia, and we're going to have a SIMBA chain with the underlying blockchains that we're using. We're looking at Fabric to connect with one of the OEMs, and we're looking at using perhaps Polygon Edge or Consensus Quorum as the other chain to connect everything together. So we're going to have a multi-chain scenario there, and that's going to be deployed in a system called Hangar 18, which is an environment that has the authority to operate. So this is actually going to be working, in a secure, IL4, 5 environment within the DoD, and it's going to be made available for other customers to interface with. So this could become, a really interesting sort of deployment that could be one of the de facto kind of deployments in the DoD that people use for blockchain. So this could really be a game changer in terms of how the DoD relates to blockchain and uses blockchain in the future. And right from the outset of SIMBA, we've never really, we have, we've built NFT marketplaces, we've interacted with some, projects that we've taken on that interface with crypto to a certain degree, but really we're more about kind of using blockchain for real world applications to solve real world problems like the car titles and so forth. It's really game changing. It changes the way people live their lives and how they interface with what they need to interface with, and that is really interesting. And the DoD work is by tracking those parts from multiple vendors. The whole supply chain becomes transparent, right, to the DoD. They know exactly where everything is at every step of the way, and that's providing kind of real value.
It's my thoughts exactly. I mean, it's exciting to see the integration of blockchain into government and traditional like enterprise. And that's a game changer for the California Department of Motor Vehicles. I would love to see that whole thing come to pass, because it needs some help with, the way they operate with data. I'm sure you guys already know that because they've probably reached out for help with you guys. I wanted to ask you, so if you have a customer, I'm sure you've had other clients that have come to you and they wanted to operate on more than one blockchain. You guys can help that as well. Yeah?
Yeah, I touched on this earlier. Right, so we're working on a few different things there. So what we can already do, using the relationship mechanism that I mentioned earlier, you can connect smart contracts together, and you can also connect smart contracts on different chains together. So you can support like a migration of an application from one chain to another and just link them across, and you can query the data across both chains. We did something like that for a demonstration for the DoD, where we connected internal MRO, they're called maintenance, repair, and overhaul data, which was which needed to be private to NavAir. And we connected the PO that they sent out, so when they do a purchase order, we connected that across to a separate network. So that was on Consensus Quorum. The separate network was on Fabric, and we connected those two across, and that connected to data that was OEMs were providing, and also data that we imported from other sources like Publog, which is a database that the DoD used you can look up things like from a PO, you'll have a cage code, which is actually the manufacturer it identifies the manufacturer. And PubLog will have a reference of that contract. So every contract the DoD ever does is in PubLog, and you can use that to kind of figure out, to connect the data and extend this graph to figure out who the actual OEM supplier is and what their address is and what other things they've done. So we created this big kind of, in a sense, a graph across multiple chains, and you can query it in one single place. So that's one way we can connect chains together. And then the other thing that we're working on now is to provide interoperability between certain contracts between different chains. And we're looking in different ways of doing that. We've got a proof of concept that we're working on now between that can, for example, interoperate an NFT between Fabric and Polygon, for example. So we're providing that kind of level of bridging as well. We're actively looking at different ways of doing that, and we know there's a lot of efforts in the Web3 community in that space as well, and we're researching those as well and seeing how we can leverage those too.
Fantastic, Ian. Thank you for sharing so much in depth. You're just a wealth of knowledge. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners around the world about what you guys have going at SIMBA?
No, I think we covered everything. It's a pleasure to be here, and we're looking forward to not only SIMBA's journey, but we're really looking forward to Web3 being this kind of real revolutionary sort of change in everybody's lives, right? Whether people know they have a wallet or not, this technology we believe can really transform kind of the way we do things more generally, And looking forward to that vision, realizing that vision.
Hey, thanks for being an important part of it and helping bridge Web 2 to 3, for governments, enterprises, and more. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and we welcome you back, and you and your team, and pleasure's all mine.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
If you liked today's episode, definitely like and subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, click that little bell notification and subscribe to the channel. Show your support and chime in here tomorrow for another special episode. Until then, make it a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to New to Crypto Podcast. If you like the episode, be sure to follow and subscribe. You can listen to every episode on all major platforms. Have an interest in being on the show or want advertising? Reach out at newtocrypto.io. Head over to our site, newtocrypto.io, to access the resources mentioned in each episode. Until next time, remember to navigate the crypto landscape with pinpoint accuracy.